What is the need for the flood? When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, My spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were born on the earth, both in those days and afterwards, when the sons of God came to the daughters of man, who bore children to them. They were the powerful men of old, the famous men. Now, this little expression, the sons of God and the daughters of men, and there are three popular beliefs of what in the world are the sons of God and the daughters of men. How can we identify these? And some have said, well, it's the descendants of Seth. Remember, Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, and then they had another child named Seth. And some would say it's the godly line of Seth, the Sethites, and then the ungodly line of Cain. This would not be Canaanites, but the Cainites. Okay? We're not talking about Canaan, we're talking about Cain. Canaan is C-A-N-A-A-N. This is C-A-I-N. Don't get the two words mixed up. They sound alike. All right, so some would say it's the godly and the ungodly mixing. Others would say, no, it's angels and women. Angels and women. Now, why would you think that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. And one is that the term sons of God is also used in the book of Job, which was written in the same time period. And in Job chapter 1 and in chapter 2, it says that the sons of God, that Satan came before God, and the sons of God came also with him. And there it would seem to indicate that the sons of God is a reference to angelic beings. So that would be supported also with a couple of New Testament passages. Now, the third option is that these are demon-possessed, powerful men that are finding wives and marrying them. And it's as though man is creating a superhuman race, kind of the same thing that Hitler had in mind, even though he didn't carry it out so good. But this idea that we're going to create the super race, the super, we don't need God, and we're just going to create the super race. Well, that may be what was going on. I don't know. I kind of lean toward the second one, the sons of God, because of Job chapter 1, verse 6. All right. Second reason was that wickedness was great in the earth. It says, the Lord saw that wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every scheme his mind thought of was nothing but evil all the time. That's a horrible thing to say, isn't it? That the universal description of man, except for Noah and his family, was that people weren't thinking any good thoughts at all. It was just, how can we devise new ways to be evil? That's horrible, isn't it? And when things got that bad, you know there are people that are that way today. You know there are people that wake up every day and they're wondering what new evil thing they can dream up and what new computer virus they can write or whatever. There are people that wake up every day just so they can do evil. You know there are people that wake up every day trying to figure out how to kill you. There are. So God looked and he saw the wickedness of man, the scheme of his mind, nothing but evil. And then it says, and your Bible may say that, and so the Lord repented that he had made man. Now the word repented, Naham can be translated grieved. It's not that God said, "Oh man, I wish I'd have never made man." Boy, that was a mistake. No, that's not what That's not what we're saying here. It isn't that God has regretted it, but that God is deeply grieved in his heart. Did you know that the only reason you can have grief is because you're made in the image of God who can have grief? All right, so we want you to notice what was going on there. And God was grieved. Okay, we're going to move to Babel. What did we miss? Oh, 2350 is basically the year for the flood. And that's derived from the genealogies of Genesis 5 and 10. 5 and 11. I said 10, I meant 11. Okay. We're going to move to Babel. That's a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a stepped pyramid kind of structure, and it's probably what Babel was. And there was one built in Ur, where Abraham came from. There are a lot of examples of those. And the one at Babel, there was one built at Babel. I looked, no, this was the one at Ur, looked like this. And it's been reconstructed, looks like that. Okay, let's go back to Babel. All right. What was the sin of Babel? What was the sin? I think it was pride. Let us build this tower that we may make a name for ourselves. I think it was disobedience. Lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth. God had said, I want you to scatter over the face of the earth. And they said, no, we don't want to scatter. We want to stay together. Now God knew that there was a potential for ultimate evil, because here's what God said. If they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. God saw that these people, who probably had a lot higher intelligence even than we have today, because I think the race has had a lot of corruption into it. And I wonder what they would have developed if God had not scattered them over the face of the earth. These were people who were proud, pride was going on, and they had the potential for ultimate evil, all of it leading them away from God. And so God said, you know what? They don't want to obey me and scatter, so I'll do it for them. So it's interesting that God judged them. God's judgment on the people was the confusion of language, and they were scattered over the face of the earth. The name of the place is Babel, which is very close to another word that means confusion. Now, here's interesting. I think this is one of the funniest events in the whole Bible. Because can you imagine what happened? Kathy and Tom were talking, and she says, hand me a hammer. And he understands that. And then she says something, and he doesn't understand. He says, what did you say? Only he's now speaking a language he thinks he's always been speaking, but he's never spoken a word of it before. But all of a sudden, he has no recollection and no remembrance of the language he's been speaking up to this moment. And neither does Kathy. All of a sudden, she's speaking some form of Swahili, and he's speaking some kind of German. And they don't have any idea what each one is saying. And they're getting mad at each other because they don't have any memory of a different language. Don't you think that's funny? Do I have a warped sense of humor? I think it's a funny event. And so because of that, people began to get with folks that they could understand. and they began to get with people, and it was natural for them to go off because they could understand and start discussing, what do you think is going on around here? How come everybody is speaking a different language? We're still speaking the language we have always spoken. And another group is maybe saying this. I just think it's one of the funniest things, but God used that to do what? Scatter them over the face of the earth. All right, family tree. You have in your notes the family tree. And I thought this was kind of interesting that you should have it. All right. And so let's look at your family tree. Once we get through those first 4 events, then Moses begins to introduce us to the family of Nahor. Now, if you'll notice down through here, Nahor, there's a mistake right here. And see, Nahor should be pointing to Terah. It's pointing to a dotted line. Would you move that and point him over to Terah? Nahor should be looking or pointing down to Terah. Now, Terah had 2 wives, okay? And the wives are indicated by a dotted line over to a question mark because we don't know what the wife's name was. And so I've got a wife on each side of the word Terah. You see that? On your notes. There's a, no, it's not on the screen. But you'll see that the word Terah has a wife on each side. Now, by one wife, Terah had a daughter named what? Sarah. Okay. By the other wife, Terah had a son named Abram. Okay? He also had son Nahor and son Haran. I want you to find 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Do you see those? Arrow pointing to all 3 of them. All right? Now, Abram married his half-sister, Sarah. You see that? Okay. Now I want to ask you a question to make sure you're awake. What is the relationship between Nahor and his wife, Milcah? His niece. His niece. All right. She married her uncle. And then you'll notice that Haran, he probably had 2 wives the way I read the text. And by his other wife, he had Lot. What is then the relationship between Lot and Iscah? Half-brother and sister. Okay, and Lot and Milcah, half-brother and sister. Okay, what would be the relationship between Lot and Abram? Nephew and uncle. All right, that's good. Now, somebody that's real sharp at this, tell me the relationship between Isaac and Rebekah. First cousin, once removed. Kinney was a first cousin twice removed. He was removed by the sheriff once.
More than once.
It's a first cousin once removed, and that's because there's a generation between them. Otherwise, they'd be first cousins. I think it's very interesting to see, then, the relationship between Jacob and his 2 wives. And I'll let you figure it out, okay? Well, you know what the saddest thing on this chart is? Look on the right-hand side with Lot. You remember Lot went with Abram, and they went down. Remember they went up to Haran, and then Terah, the father, died, and then they came down into Canaan. And then Abram had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, and all of that. You remember that story? We've been going over it for a couple of weeks. Okay. Well, remember Lot came with him? And they had servants also. And they had large flocks. And what happened was that their servants began to quarrel with each other and fight amongst themselves. And it's like Lot's servants couldn't get along with Abram's servants. They kept fighting among each other. And finally Abram said, you know, Lot, this is